What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a full anime and manga news roundup for last week, and honestly, this was one of those weeks where anime completely took over the conversation. We got trailers, new adaptation announcements, sequel confirmations, release windows, and a few late week updates that made everything feel especially packed. Manga still had a couple of important stories too, especially if you care about long-running series and new English releases, so overall there was definitely a lot to get into. So let's start with the biggest anime headline, because for a lot of people the loudest story last week was definitely Sekiro, No Defeat. The anime dropped a new trailer and confirmed a 2026 theatrical release in Japan, and that instantly made it one of the most talked about announcements of the week. And honestly, that makes total sense. Sekiro already has that intense, precise, high-stakes energy built into it. So the second you attach a movie announcement and a fresh trailer to that, people are obviously going to pay attention. What makes the Sekiro news hit even harder is that it doesn't feel like random adaptation news. It feels like a project that already knows exactly what kind of tone it wants. And that always helps. When people watch a trailer and the reaction is immediately, "Okay, this actually looks kind of crazy," that's a really good sign. So if you were trying to sum up last week in just a couple of major anime headlines, Sekiro would absolutely be near the top. But Sekiro definitely wasn't the only adaptation story worth talking about. From Far Away, or Kanata Kara, got a TV anime announcement for 2026, and that one brought a very different kind of energy. It's tied to the manga's 35th anniversary, so it felt more like a classic title finally getting the fresh spotlight it deserves. Then on top of that, Tank Chair was announced for fall 2026 with a teaser and visual, and Polygon Pictures was confirmed on animation production. So in basically the same stretch, you had one announcement that felt nostalgic and legacy-driven, and another that felt sharp, modern, and built to stand out on visuals and momentum. And honestly, that contrast was one of the coolest things about last week. The anime news didn't all feel the same. You had something like From Far Away reminding people that older shoujo and classic titles still matter, and then you had something like Tank Chair showing that the pipeline for stylish new action adaptations is still going strong. It gave the whole week a nice balance. It wasn't just all remakes, and it wasn't just all new battle series either. It really felt like the anime industry was showing it can push several different lanes at once. Then you move a little further into the week and you get more sequel and continuation energy. Grand Blue Dreaming Season 3 confirmed a July 2026 premiere and added 3 new cast members, which is exactly the kind of update fans want because it turns a vague hope into something real. Once you have an actual month attached to it, the hype just feels more solid. And then Steel Ball Run, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, officially hit Netflix with its first stage, and that gave the week one of its biggest real-time talking points. Because once something actually drops, it stops being just news and becomes active discussion. People start reacting right away to the episode, the pacing, the adaptation choices, and of course the release strategy. And since there still wasn't an official date for episode 2 at that point, that became part of the conversation too. And let's be honest, Steel Ball Run had main character energy last week. Even with everything else going on, JoJo is one of those franchises that can instantly take over the room the second new content actually lands. So while Sekiro may have been the big trailer headline, Steel Ball Run was absolutely one of the biggest overall conversation pieces because people were actively talking about it in real time. Another anime announcement that stood out last week was Vertex Force. Aniplex revealed it as a new original TV anime for 2026 from director Kazuhiro Takamura, and I always think original anime deserves a little extra attention. Adaptations naturally get more immediate hype because people already know the name, but original projects are where things can get really interesting. There's no built-in roadmap, no fanbase comparing every choice to a manga chapter. It has to stand on its own, and that can be risky, but it can also be really exciting. So even if Vertex Force isn't the loudest title in the room yet, it's definitely the kind of announcement worth keeping an eye on early. Now let's talk about One Piece, because One Piece managed to stay in the news last week in more than one way. One of the more interesting stories wasn't about a trailer or a new episode, but about the remake itself. In a newly published interview, WIT Studio president George Wada explained that the remake partly grew out of Eiichiro Oda feeling it was a shame that newer generations weren't always experiencing the older anime in the best possible way, and that the remake is aiming for faster pacing and a more modern structure. And I think that matters, because it tells you the remake isn't just being treated like a nostalgia project. It's also being treated like a way to make One Piece easier for new fans to actually jump into. That's a big deal for a series this huge, because One Piece is legendary, but it's also intimidating for a lot of people. So the idea of a version designed to feel smoother and more accessible makes a lot of sense. Then One Piece got another update with additional Elbaf arc cast announcements. Aiin Sakura was announced as Gerd and Ryota Teuchi as Road, and the update also reinforced that the anime is set to return after its break. So in the same week, One Piece was part of the long-term conversation because of the remake philosophy, and part of the short-term weekly conversation because the current anime is getting ready to step back into the spotlight. That's a strong week for any franchise, but for One Piece, it almost feels normal at this point. The series always seems to be operating on multiple levels at the same time. A late-week story that I think a lot of people were happy to see was Medalist. Right after Season 2 wrapped up, a sequel anime movie was announced for 2027 along with an ultra teaser visual and trailer. That's exactly the kind of news fans love getting quickly, because it removes that uncertainty. Even if 2027 still sounds a bit far off, it's way better than ending a season and then hearing absolutely nothing for who knows how long. That kind of momentum matters a lot. Also last week, Dorohedoro Season 2 rolled out its opening and ending videos and reinforced that upcoming premiere date, while also confirming streaming plans and Mappa's return. And once opening and ending videos start dropping, you know a release is basically right there. That's when fans stop casually watching updates and start going fully into countdown mode. And if you're a Jujutsu Kaisen fan, last week also gave you something to hold on to. A preview revealed that Season 3 is heading into an extended 27-minute Sendai Colony episode, and that episode is set to conclude Part 1 of the Culling Game arc. That matters because longer episodes always make something feel more event-like. It tells fans this isn't just another normal weekly installment. It's a moment the production clearly wants to hit harder. There were also a couple more sequel-style stories toward the end of the week. Hanakimi got a Season 2 announcement and a trailer, although there still wasn't a broadcast date attached. And Jack of All Trades, Party of None also got a Season 2 announcement right after its first season finale. These aren't necessarily the biggest headlines of the week, but they still add to that overall feeling that this turned into sequel season for a lot of projects all at once. So if I had to sum up the anime side of last week in one sentence, I'd say it was a very forward-moving week. Big trailer for Sekiro, classic series getting new anime life through From Far Away, a fresh fall 2026 project in Tankshare, a major streaming launch for Steel Ball Run, an original anime announcement with Vertex Force, a movie continuation for Medalist, launch prep for Dorohedoro, and multiple sequel confirmations on top of all that. It genuinely felt stacked. Now moving over to manga. The manga side of the week didn't have the same volume as anime, but it did have one really important story, and that was Space Brothers. It was announced that the manga will conclude in 3 more chapters after a 19-year run, with volume 46 scheduled for release later this year. That is the kind of headline that changes the tone of a weekly roundup immediately, because now you're not talking about a debut or a simple release update. You're talking about a long-running series entering its final stretch after nearly 2 decades. And that just hits differently. With Space Brothers, what makes that announcement feel so significant is the sheer length of the run. 19 years means the series has existed through multiple anime eras, different manga trends, and entirely different generations of readers. So when you hear that there are only 3 chapters left, that's more than just schedule news. That's a milestone. That's the end of a major chapter in manga history. Even if you're not someone who's been reading it week to week, you can still recognize that this is one of those ending announcements that carries real weight. The rest of the manga news last week leaned more toward publishing and English release momentum, but that still matters. Tokyopop announced Bride of Ignat Volume 1 for release in digital, paperback, and hardcover formats, which is a solid release strategy because it gives the title multiple ways to reach readers instead of limiting it to one format. Also, Manga Mavericks Books announced 7 spring manga releases, including 5 debuts and 2 continuing titles. So even if manga didn't have as many loud headlines as anime, it still had meaningful movement. Readers got a major Legacy series update through Space Brothers, and they also got more signs that English releases are continuing to expand. That's probably the best way to describe manga last week overall. It was lighter than anime in terms of sheer noise, but still important in terms of substance. One major emotional headline, and a couple of practical reader-focused updates that matter if you actually keep up with what's becoming available. So if I were summing up the week before we move into the bonus ranking section, I'd say anime absolutely won the week on hype and volume, while manga delivered the biggest end-of-an-era feeling through Space Brothers. It wasn't equal across both categories, but it definitely wasn't empty. There was plenty to talk about. First, let's do the Shonen Jump Top 5 manga. At number 1, Chainsaw Man. And honestly, that makes total sense, because Chainsaw Man has that rare quality where it feels chaotic and iconic at the same time. It's loud, messy, emotional, weird, and somehow still completely in control of its own identity. When people put Chainsaw Man first, what they're really saying is they want a series that feels unpredictable every single time it moves. At number 2, One Piece. And nobody is going to be surprised by that, because One Piece is one of those series that almost lives outside ranking culture at this point. It's so massive, so established, and so beloved that second place still feels like top-tier respect. If Chainsaw Man is the wild card with modern edge, One Piece is the all-time giant that never really leaves the room. At number 3, Boruto. This is the placement that always gets people talking, because Boruto has one of the most debated reputations in modern shonen. Some people are too hard on it because they only compare it to Naruto, while other people respect it for trying to stand on its own. So putting it at number 3 gives the list a little more bite. At number 4, Dandadan. Honestly, this is a really fun pick because Dandadan represents that newer wave of manga and anime fandom that loves speed, chaos, comedy, energy, and just pure momentum. It feels like a series that doesn't ask permission. It just runs at you full speed. And then at number 5, Spy X Family. That's actually a perfect closer because it balances everything else out. You've got intensity, legacy, debate, and chaos. And then Spy X Family comes in with style, warmth, and broad appeal. It's one of those series that can sit next to louder titles and still never feel out of place. So as a full top 5, that Shonen Jump list actually has a really nice rhythm to it. Chainsaw Man, One Piece, Boruto, Dandadan, and Spy X Family. Now let's do your top 5 anime of last week. At number 1, Steel Ball Run JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And honestly, after the way the week played out, that feels like a very believable number 1. It had the launch factor, it had the JoJo factor, it had the event feeling, and it had people actively talking the moment it dropped. It's the kind of title that doesn't just show up in the weekly conversation. It kind of takes over the room for a while. At number 2, Fairyren. And this is one of those placements that says a lot about how strong the series' reputation still is. Frieren has this quiet authority to it. It doesn't always need the loudest moment or the flashiest twist to stay near the top of people's minds. Sometimes a show earns so much trust from the audience that even its presence in a ranking feels natural. At number 3, One Piece again, which honestly feels right because this was a strong week for One Piece in more than one way. It had the remake discussion, the Elbaf cast update, and that sense of the anime getting ready to come back into the spotlight. So even outside its legacy power, there was enough actual movement for it to feel fully justified in a top 5 conversation. At number 4, Ikoku Nikki. I actually like this pick a lot because every ranking gets more interesting when there's at least one choice that makes people stop for a second and think. Not every top 5 needs to be built only from the loudest names. Sometimes a quieter or less expected inclusion is exactly what gives the ranking personality. And then at number 5, Ashi no Ko. That's another strong closer because Ashi no Ko has enough mainstream pull to feel big, but it also has a really specific emotional and tonal identity that helps it stand out. It's one of those series that can fit into a lot of different anime conversations and still feel distinct. So that whole top 5 has a really nice spread to it. Steel Ball Run JoJo Bizarre Adventure, Fairyren, One Piece, Ikoku Nikki, and Ashi no K. That was all the news of this week. See you in the next video.